Tonight on Politicat, looking down the ballot at some contested Senate races, states to watch, Utah and Nevada might be the new swing states, plus a look into the new president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, and how he's shaking things up in Asia. This is Politicat, your political news right now. Good evening, I'm Eric Miller. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we'd like to shift our focus away from the presidential race to the so-called down-ballot races, that crucial third of the Senate up for re-election this year. 33 seats are up for re-election, and most of them will stay with the incumbent party, but there are 7 states where the races are contested, and they may shift the balance of power in the Senate towards the direction of the Democrats. Wisconsin's Ron Johnson is projected to almost certainly be defeated by Democratic challenger Russ Feingold, while here in Illinois, Republican Mark Kirk faces a losing battle against Tammy Duckworth. Indiana, New Hampshire, Missouri, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina are the sites of hotly contested races between Republican incumbents and Democratic challengers. If things go the way the Democrats are hoping, we could see a democratically controlled Senate after November 8th. How to explain such an upheaval? Well, it's easy to point to the first thing that comes to mind, Trump. But that's why we have our panel here tonight. Let's turn to them now. I'd like to welcome our guests, North by Northwestern Assistant Politics Editor Dylan Doppelt and host of WNUR's Your World, Brock Hall. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So first off, Brock, Dylan, what do you think we're seeing here? What might be causing this shift?
Well, I think that a lot of it does have to do with Trump, and not just because that he is the most disapproved candidate in recent history. His poll numbers are absolutely abysmal. But I do think that a lot of it also has to do with his lack of fundraising. He has not brought in a lot of money to either his campaign or to these states where a lot of these candidates are running. And a lot of this money not only goes to his campaign, but also to these candidates. So if he's not bringing in the money, they're not getting the money or the resources they need to win, and they're just not doing as well as they should be.
Brock?
And in a lot of down-ballot races throughout the years, they break later towards one candidate or the other because people don't pay as much attention to down-ballot races as they do the presidential race. So this year they're breaking towards the Democrats in most of these toss-up Senate elections. And it's also compounded by the fact that, as you said, Trump isn't raising money and helping out the RNC in a lot of these states. And these candidates are also kind of between a rock and a hard place when it comes to how to deal with Trump. Do they support and endorse him, or do they kind of run away from him? And that's played out in different ways for different candidates.
Now, looking at Illinois in the race between Representative Tammy Duckworth and incumbent Senator Mark Kirk, it's been a long, hard-fought race. Now, we've been covering it since last spring, and it looks like where it was once close, Duckworth has pulled out a pretty significant lead over Kirk. In recent weeks, she's been polling about 10 points ahead. In fact, as we speak, Kirk and Duckworth are facing off in the second of 3 debates before the election. Right off the bat, the situation casts doubt on the Trump theory because Kirk has been a vocal Trump critic pretty much from the get-go. Now, Brock, any idea what we're seeing here?
Yes, Illinois is a very blue state, and it always has been. And Mark Kirk is a Republican running for re-election in a presidential election year. And so obviously he's already fighting an uphill battle, and he was fighting an uphill battle even before Trump became the nominee. So this was always going to be a hard race for Mark Kirk, and again, Republican Senate super PACs aren't spending a lot of money on it. The Democrats are because they know they can pick it up, and so he's not running as many ads, and he's kind of on a downward spiral at this point, and the Republicans know that this seat it's very likely that they're going to lose this, so they've basically, in a sense, pulled out.
Now, this election actually has the potential for something pretty rare in U.S. politics. If Pennsylvania and Nevada, the 2 closest Senate races this election, both go Republican and the other more democratically leaning states go to the Democrats, we could be seeing the first tied Senate since 2001. Now, Dylan, how would a tie, which is broken by the vote of the vice president, work in today's political climate?
You know, I think that it actually wouldn't make as much of a difference as people think, because no matter what the outcome of the presidential election, I think that the House is going to stay in the hands of the Republicans. So if Donald Trump and Mike Pence do win the presidency and the vice presidency, then the control of the Senate will go towards Republicans, and the House will also have control, or the Republicans will also have control of the House. They will also have control of the presidency. So in that case, they will have the power to pass a lot of conservative policies. But if Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine win, then they would have control of the Senate and the presidency, but not control of the House, and gridlock would still continue as it does today.
Well, it will be an interesting race for sure, potentially as interesting as the race for president. And when we come back, we'll take a look at some states worth watching come Election Day after the break.
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
The 2016 presidential election has perhaps been one of the most polarizing elections to date. We've seen sharp divides by gender, race, and religion, just to name a few. What remains less polarized, however, are the voting patterns of the individual states. We've seen quite a bit of deviation from historical norms in the so-called red and blue states. This election promises to redraw the electoral map and redefine how we think of historically Republican and historically Democratic states. Now, breaking this down further, I'd like to turn again to our panel. Now, to look specifically at some of the really important states. Now, first of all, I want to focus on Arizona and Georgia. We do not usually think of these two states as being swing states, but it has been apparent in recent weeks that these two will have a large impact on the election. Arizona, of course, has been historically Republican. Now, however, polls show conflicting results. While a Reuters Ipsos poll shows Trump up by 4 percentage points in Arizona, an Arizona Republic poll shows Clinton up by 5 percentage points. Similarly, in Georgia, a longtime Republican stronghold, Trump has only a 6-point lead over Clinton, according to some polls, a lead that appears to be narrowing. Now, why are these longtime Republican states suddenly being less and less Republican?
Well, he's losing is part of the problem, and he's losing badly in the national popular vote. So that starts putting states into play that aren't usually in play, like these somewhat red but not completely red states like Arizona and Georgia. And so Arizona is currently on a track with the way demographics work out to become an actual real-life swing state in the future because it has a growing Latino population, and Trump has turned off the Latino population, turned them away from the Republican Party. And that's going to be a huge issue for Republicans in the future if they want to win Arizona in this election or in future elections.
And Dylan?
Yeah, I think that he's really right on this, that the demographics is the major issue. In Arizona, there are a huge growing Latino population. And in Georgia, there's a growing Latino and Hispanic population, African American population. And these are just groups that both Trump and the Republican Party have been losing for many, many years. So even if Hillary Clinton does not win these states this year, it is likely that a Democratic presidential candidate will win them in the future.
Now, another interesting state we're keeping an eye on is Utah. Independent candidate Evan McMullin has been gaining ground there for the past couple of weeks. The political website 538 estimates that McMullin could have anywhere from 25 to 40% chance of winning Utah. This would make McMullin the first third-party or independent candidate to win a state in the presidential election since 1968. Now, what do you make of McMullin and Utah? Now, why might the people of Utah be choosing an independent candidate over one of the two more established choices?
Well, I think that a lot of it has to do with the large Mormon population in Utah. They have historically been a very ideologically moderate conservative group, and they were actually Utah was Mitt Romney's best state in 2012, and so they are very turned off by the rhetoric that the Trump campaign has been bringing out, and they have this whole time been looking for other options, and Evan McMullin offers that option, and I think that it's going to be really compelling for a lot of them.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really interesting three-way race right now. Clinton isn't necessarily gaining ground, but if it pans out just right and Trump and McMullin split the conservative vote, which is about 2/3 of the electorate in the state of Utah, Clinton could actually win it as well, which would be very interesting. But I agree that McMullin's candidacy is very historic.
And should McMullin win, what would the effect be on the overall electoral college? How does this change the map?
You know, I don't think it would actually change the map all that much. I think if this would be much more of a fluke, that if the Republican Party remains together after this election, and if they maintain a more establishment politics going forward, that Utah will likely stay in the Republican column. But if it continues down this road of Trumpism and populism, that it may become a swing state for far in the future.
And finally, 37 states have already begun early voting, and Hillary Clinton is leading in several key battleground states. Some experts say this is an indication that Clinton will ultimately win. What do you think? Should we really put that much faith in our early voting numbers?
I think when the early voting numbers match what we see in the polling, that's a pretty good indication that the polling may be right and that Clinton may have a huge lead. If we look at North Carolina and Florida, Democrats are out early voting. Republicans, compared to the way they did in 2012, Democrats are doing much better. Republicans are doing worse. There's a few states that look good for Republicans, like Ohio and Iowa. Those states are not in a terrible position for them right now. But overall, it looks like Democrats are doing a lot better than they did in 2012.
Yeah, and I don't think that I actually don't think that we should read into the early voting results that much. It's been known that Democrats largely vote much earlier than Republican candidates or Republican voters. So I think that the early voting results do have a tendency to bias towards Democrats, but the turnout has been much larger in general. So I do think that it shows a Democratic win coming up.
And what about those voters that are still undecided, still sitting on the fence? How are they going to impact things?
Well, in a change election, which a lot of people have been considering this a change election, if you're independent and you aren't decided yet, I would think that maybe you might be inclined towards Trump if you haven't been turned off by his rhetoric yet. But there's not a lot of undecideds at this point. More and more people who are undecided or are third party are moving towards the Clinton column. So there's very few people that are undecided at this point. And I think it's likely that you'll see the numbers are so low at this point that it's not going to swing the election. I mean, she has a 7-8 point margin at this point, so there's not going to be a huge surprise likely on election day.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of the undecided voters that we have been showing up in the polls have actually been former Bernie supporters that were reluctant to support Hillary, but a lot of recent polls have been showing a decrease in support for third-party voters. So I think that they are coming back home to the Democratic Party and to Hillary Clinton, so I think that they won't have as much of an effect as people think they will.
Okay, thank you both very much. And we are just under 2 weeks until Election Day. There will be sure to be lots of twists and turns from now until then. Some experts say the election will likely be a test of strength between metropolitan areas voting for Clinton and non-metropolitan areas voting for Trump. After the break, we'll be talking to Politicat co-anchor Jesse Kirsch about the Philippines.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Cheer you all the go.
Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
And welcome back. In the midst of all the election news this week, an important change that could have far-reaching effects for the U.S. got a little lost in the shuffle. Controversial Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte announced he plans a historic realignment, pivoting away from the U.S. and pinning his country's future on China and Russia. The Philippines has long been America's strongest ally in Asia and currently hosts or plans to host 5 U.S. military bases. Now Duterte says he wants the U.S. gone. And for more on that, we are now joined by Politicat's own Jesse Kirsch. Jesse, thanks so much for being here.
You got it, absolutely. Good evening, Art. Well, there are quite a few developments to discuss on this. Breaking it down simply, President Duterte spent time in China this week to discuss trade agreements and cooperation between the two nations, ranging on things such as narcotics and even tourism. Most importantly, while in China, Duterte said he wants a separation with the United States. It's a little unclear what that means at this time, but Duterte has specifically ordered the end of joint military exercises with the United States and said he wants all U.S. troops out within 2 years.
Okay. And Jesse, this all comes as a bit of a surprise, doesn't it?
That's an understatement for sure, Eric. Absolutely. The Philippines has long contested China's sweeping territorial claim to the South China Sea. And just this summer, even an arbitration tribunal ruled in the Philippines' favor, saying China could not claim authority across the entire body of water. But now, Duterte, who himself has advocated in the past for the Filipino sovereignty in the contested water, is seeking friendship and even military support from China, asking for them to sell the Philippines weapons. And it seems every day he's trying to separate from the U.S. just a little bit more.
And what are the long-term consequences we're looking at here?
Well, there are two giant categories you could look at this. There are U.S. interests and also ways to balance Chinese interests. First off, it would be a strategic nightmare for the U.S. Currently, American forces are stationed in the Philippines precisely to contain a rising China and contest its claims to the South China Sea. But going beyond that could look at losing a lot more leverage and, even more importantly, a launching pad for troop deployments to the east. That means against China, against Russia, against North Korea, and really anyone else that the U.S. may need to get involved in a military conflict with down the road. And if Duterte keeps inching closer and closer to China and Russia, as he keeps suggesting, the next U.S. president may have a lot of diplomacy to rewrite.
Okay, Jesse, thank you so much. And we will keep you updated on this story right here on Politicat. And now for a quick update from the campaign trail. NNN's Kelly Norris takes us to the grand opening of the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., where the Trump family took a break from campaigning to promote their brand.
From protests to presentation, the Trump International Hotel in Washington was the focal point in Trump world today. The presidential nominee and his family took the morning off of the trail for the grand opening of the hotel.
We have celebrated many milestones, but the one that gathers us here today, the grand opening of the redeveloped Old Post Office building, is incredibly special to each member of my family.
Although the event wasn't a campaign stop, the affair was not without politics.
Today is a metaphor for what we can accomplish for this country. Same kind of thing.
Trump wasn't the only political voice being heard. Outside the hotel, people lined up in the early morning to protest Trump's remarks, politics, and business practices.
And somebody who won't recognize basic democratic principles, who won't recognize the basic laws of this country that say that he has to negotiate, has no place trying to be the president of this country. And if he wants to represent workers, and if he says that he loves working people, that he loves workers, that he's such a good employer, then put your money where your mouth is. Show it.
A pig supporting a pig for president. He needs to be protested. He's easy pickings at this point. He's so bad. He's so bad, he is bad.
Despite the hundreds of anti-Trump protesters, he had some supporters in the crowd this morning as well.
All of these protesters, I disagree with their theories of the deal, but it's their choice. It's my choice to be here as a Trump supporter.
From Washington, Kelly Norris.
Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton spent the last few days campaigning in Florida and today held a rally in the closely contested state of North Carolina with the First Lady, Michelle Obama. Well, folks, that's a wrap for our show tonight. Thanks to our guests Dylan Doppelt and Brock Hall. I'm Eric Miller.
I'm Jesse Kirsch.
And have a good one out there, folks. You've been watching Politicat.